Hi everyone, Shelly here. Today I'll show you how I completed my portrait painting homework following an online flesh tones workshop that I took. This is a full painting demo along with instruction on how I mixed the flesh tones needed for this portrait. Artist Tina Garrett, my mentor, gave this amazing flesh tones workshop. Her realistic skin tones in her portraits are just one of the things that makes her a living master. Okay, let's get started by mixing our skin tones. Okay, what you see on the palette from left to right is Cad Yellow Deep, Cad Orange Deep, Carmine Red, Transparent Oxide Red, and then Ultramarine Blue. Now coming down the right side, you have Bluish Parma, and then just underneath that is the Cobalt Violet, and then down in the left corner is my Titanium White. So I started with a little bit of Transparent Oxide Red, and then I mixed into that some Ultramarine Blue. So what I've got here is a purplish section of my dark area that I'm mixing up. So I'm going to mix my darks at the top of the palette. Now I'm creating a reddish dark, and I want them to touch so that I can see how they work together, because in the painting they're going to be touching. And then here we're going to have a more bluish cool dark. So I wanted to have a warm dark, a cool dark, and then sort of a purplish dark, which is in the middle. All right, let's mix the middle values now. So we're starting with a little bit of the Transparent Oxide Red, grabbing into some of that Cad Orange, and then I like to use the Parma, the Bluish Parma, to lighten my mid-value mixtures rather than dipping into the Titanium White, which can make your skin tones look chalky and ghostly, and that's not the effect we're going for here. So if you can avoid lightening your mid-value mixtures with Titanium White, try to at all costs. So think to use the yellow or that blue Parma. They're not going to give you that ghostly effect. The Titanium White is much stronger than any of your Cad colors or that blue Parma. King's Blue is another great option. I didn't have any, or I would probably have that on my palette. So I can interchange the Bluish Parma or the King's Blue. The King's Blue is just a little cooler and bluer, while this Bluish Parma has a bit more of a purple violet tint to it. And in the flesh tones that we're mixing, I did see a lot of purple, so it made sense to go with the Bluish Parma. And my red, this Carmine Red, the reason I chose it was I could really see that working in her lip color. We're going to mix that here towards the end of our mixing session, but I just love the Carmine Red, and I knew it would work in the other areas as well. So I'm making sure that my mid-value piles are touching, and I'm using a little bit of each to make the new color. So I want a reddish, more warm version, and then I've got a pinker version, and then now I have a more purpley version. These are all mid values. And now we're going to mix our light values. So I'm starting with that Transparent Oxide Red again, and then going right into the Blue Parma. That's going to neutralize that Transparent Oxide Red and give us a beautiful flesh tone. And it could be a little bit lighter, so we're going to grab Titanium White, which works just fine in your light values. You want your light values to be pretty much opaque, and the Titanium White is going to do that. So I'm going to get a little yellower version in my light, so I have that kind of neutral beigey light, and now I'm making a warmer, more yellow version. And they're going to touch because I'm going to keep them in my light pile down here at the bottom. I like to divide my color mixing palette into the lights on the bottom, the mid values in the middle, and the darks at the top. And that mid value gray that's underneath the glass helps me gauge if I am in the middle value or if I'm working on light values or dark values. The light values can get sometimes confusing if they're on the darker side, and you might not realize their light value, but if you compare them to that, it's like a number 5 value gray underneath the glass, then that can help gauge you in the right direction of whether something is mid value or light value. So here we have a more pink rose version of our light, and now we're going to get a bright yellowish light color here. So one thing you have to make sure you realize with the light value skin tones, you have light value, but notice there's a little highlight on the tip of her nose. Now, the highlights are not considered the light value. They're very light, and you don't really consider them in your light value skin tones. Highlights are their own thing, and you want to use them sparingly. So I'm only showing you sections at a time of my reference material. Because I took a workshop with Tina Garrett, the reference image is copywritten, so I'm just showing you bits of it at a time. And here we're mixing the lip color. And see how that carmine red just was perfect. I knew it was going to be the right red. And it didn't require too much effort to mix that beautiful lip color because we had that beautiful carmine red to begin with. So I've got a mid-value lip color, couple there. One's a little more neutral, one's more saturated and bright. Then we just mixed up a dark reddish color, so we have a dark value lip color. And now we're just getting a little neutral beigey mauve color to have if we need it. So we're just going to add a little bit more cobalt violet there. And it's going to get a little more purple. So that can work on that upper lip area there. And there we can just cool it off and make it a little more neutral by adding a touch of ultramarine blue. And now we're going to mix the white of the eyes, which is never white. And here's the light part, which we're going to make a sort of a purpley gray, light gray color. And I like to have two values for my eyes, the whites of the eyes. So there's our light value. And then we're going to mix a middle value, but it's still going to stay kind of a blue-gray neutral color. And see how I'm using the colors that I've already mixed up there to help neutralize it and keep it all in a harmony and all working together because we're mixing the colors from the colors that we've already created. And here's a look at the finished palette. You can see some beautiful darks, that wonderful red dark, and then there's a cool dark with the blue, and then that purpley dark, and then we've got our reddish brown dark. And then here's our middle values. Look at the beautiful color that we achieved there. So much orange and peachy and mauve colors and those beautiful saturated red colors for the mouth. And then that's our mid-value eye color there, that purpley gray. And then here's our light value flesh tones that we mixed. There's some beautiful colors. You want to have all colors, a little yellowish, a little pinkish, a little reddish, a little grayish, a little purplish. I think of the flesh tone as an opal. It's just full of color. If you have any color mixing questions, be sure to send me a comment or an email and I'll be happy to answer them. So let's get started with painting our portrait of this beautiful little girl. We've got all our flesh tones ready, and I'm doing this in my favorite selective start method. So I've put down a little bit of a grid just so I have a starting base, sort of a armature, if you will. And I like to start with the eye, usually the pupil, and then work out into the iris, and then the whites of the eye, and then build out. Each brush stroke touches the previous brush stroke, and it just builds out from that initial first eye. So it's very important that you put the eye in the right place. Now, I cropped my reference image to equal a 12-inch by 12-inch square canvas, and then I gridded out equally just 3-inch grids, just dividing everything in 25, 50, and 75% pieces. So I have my image pulled up on the computer, and it is on the computer at 12 inches by 12 inches. So it is exactly the same size on my computer monitor as it will be on my canvas. This allows me to use one-to-one measuring with my proportion tool. So if you've watched me paint before, you know I like to do it this way, and you're going to see that proportion tool pop in every now and then. That way I know that my eye is in the exact right place. So I do a little bit of measuring in the beginning with the proportion tool, and then as I'm building the portrait out, I don't have to measure quite as much. I can pretty much use the features that already laid down to gauge where I'm going. And since each brush stroke is building on the previous brush stroke, you don't get too far off. I feel like it lets me see the face kind of unfold in a natural way that keeps my proportions and the expression pretty much right on. Now I know sometimes I like to do an underpainting, but when I'm doing a portrait like this, just of the face, I feel pretty confident in my ability to get the likeness down correctly following the selective start method. So here you have it. So I'm just gonna let you guys watch me paint for a minute, and I'll jump back in when I see something interesting to note for you. So enjoy. So since you can't see my reference image, it may be helpful for you to note that the light is coming from above. It's a pretty bright sunlit day, but the subject is in sort of a dappled light from like a tree. I think the light's coming through the branches of trees, so it's creating sort of this dappled, spotted light effect on her face. It is a dark skin tone, and the light area is on that far side and a little bit of the cheek that's closest to us, the viewer, and then it rolls right off into the shadowed, darker sides, and you'll see that coming up. So since the light is coming from above, I want to be sure to paint that underneath part of the nose so that it's darker and looks like it's catching a little bit of shadow. Now there can be some reflective light hitting back up into it from that upper lip area, and more than likely that's what's happening here, because it's not as dark and in shadow as you'll see. There's more of a little side shadow that comes down on the cheek. But you do want to give the illusion of 3D, so this definitely needs to be painted with that in mind. Now sometimes you can be painting and you're having difficulty gauging whether your skin tones are too light or too dark. And since I know there's dark hair around her face, I'm going to go ahead and put some of that in, and it's going to help me really be able to see how light or how dark my skin and flesh tones are, and if they're working or not. And as long as you're taking from the mid-value pile when you're painting the darker area, then you know that your flesh tones are going to be pretty close, if not actually perfectly correct. One thing to remember with painting portraits, especially portraits of children, you want to keep their features soft, especially the mouth. You don't want hard edges along the mouth where it meets into the cheek and skin tones. You want those edges to just be soft and kind of melt into one another. Now you're getting to see that beautiful, cool purplish shadow that's going just underneath the nose and just underneath the bottom lip of the mouth. So it looks like I've run out of this mauve-ish skin tone that I'm going to need a lot of. So I'm going to take a moment and mix up a little bit more of the light mauve pink skin tone flesh colors that I'm going to be needing. You never want to just keep digging at your palette when there's just not enough paint left. Just stop, take the time, and mix up more. I hear this all the time, that one of the things that beginning portrait painters, the mistake that they often make is not putting enough paint onto the canvas. So don't do that. You know, you heard it here. Put paint, lots of paint on. I'm so excited to get into some of these beautiful, darker, mid to dark values that are in this painting. Even though they're dark and mid-value colors, they're still very saturated and very colorful. And when you're looking at the portrait in real life, you can really see it. It does make a difference rather than just using black from straight out of the tube and then trying to add color to the black. It will be okay, but I feel that this gives you a much better result in the end. It's just so much more colorful and beautiful to look at, especially in real life. It's so hard to capture it on camera, or you can get it a little bit better in the static photo. So at the end of the portrait demo, there's going to be a static image, and you'll see you can really look and find that there's a lot of good saturated color even in the dark areas. So I'm still looking for you guys to send in any paintings that you would like me to critique. And it would be great if you just made note in your email to me that you wouldn't mind being critiqued on one of my YouTube videos. So somebody send a painting in so we can get a painting critique done. I haven't received any yet. What are you guys waiting for? I promise I'll be kind. You will improve the way that you paint from every critique that you get. I love getting critiques. Anytime somebody wants to critique a painting, I am happy to listen, even if they're not artists. So my email information is in the description. You can send your paintings to me at Shelley@ShelleyJCox.com. That's my email address, so don't be afraid. Send me a painting. So you may be wondering why I left that white opening in the eye socket area here. I don't typically do that, but with this painting, there is little trindles or pieces of hair that are coming forward over that eye area. So I wanted to make sure that I had some flesh and eye built in underneath those pieces of hair before I put the pieces of hair in. So I'm kind of creating some flesh and bits of skin in that area that I can't really see in the reference, but it'll work because I know when I put those pieces of hair down that I'll have flesh underneath. You don't want to have white canvas underneath. That would be too stark and not look realistic. So that's why I had that white opening there around the eye. And you'll see the little bits of hair coming up here in a moment. So remember, there's dappled light on her face, so that's why you're seeing some scattered bits of light. It's almost like if you're putting together this portrait by way of putting puzzle pieces together. I'm not really looking at her face as a face. I'm looking at each little individual shape of light and color as if it were its own puzzle piece. And I'm just building this puzzle and putting them all together. And in the end, I'm going to have a beautiful portrait of this sweet little girl. So with these little pieces of hair, I'm going to lay down some initial bits, and then I'm going to go back in and kind of build up the 3D effects of the few little bits of hair that are more forward on top of the underlying hair. So I like to have 3 values in the more detailed pieces of hair. The pieces of hair that will be closest to the viewer, the pieces of hair that will help me guide the viewer to my focal point, which is that eye that's closest to us here. And to do that, to guide the viewer, you want to have the highest degree of contrast, which is going to denote your focal point, and then the greatest degree of detail closer to the focal point. And as you spread out and move away from the focal point, then you can start to lose the detail. and that will say to the viewer that this is a realistic face that has good volume and lots of 3D, and it's just going to be a more interesting face to look at than if you painted everything in full-on hard, stark detail with no lost edges, no good transitions. You know, all those things help build up the realistic effect of a portrait, but let you keep it more painterly and beautiful, because it is a painting. I'm not trying to be a photocopier and make a copy of this picture reference. I already have that. I have the picture reference. If that's what I want to do, I would just hang that on the wall and call it a day. So that's how that works. And I can see those little bits of hair. We've got some nice flesh underneath it, and I've just really pulled out some of the detail. And we're just coming up to the signature there. And here's a look at the finished portrait. You can see all that beautiful color in her skin tones. And thanks guys for watching. Send me some paintings for critique if you would like. And I will see you in the next one.